Hey everyone, I'm Mackenzie, a data scientist from Michigan, and in this video I'm going to be walking you through the Central Tendency for Housing Data project. In the last few lessons, you learned about how to calculate the mean, median, and mode, and in this project you're going to be using what you learned to analyze some housing data. To complete this project, you'll need to be familiar with using NumPy to calculate means and medians, using SciPy to calculate modes, and making inferences based on central tendency values. Let's get started. In this project, we'll be finding the mean, median, and mode cost of one-bedroom apartments in Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Queens. Using our findings, we'll make conclusions about the cost of living in each of these boroughs. We'll also discuss an important assumption that we make when we point out differences between the boroughs. We worked with StreetEasy.com to collect this data. And while we'll only focus on the cost of one-bedroom apartments in this project, the dataset includes a lot more information if you're interested in asking your own questions about the Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Queens housing market. And if you do want to look at the dataset, you can do that just by clicking on this link right here. Okay, let's go to the first task and look at our data. So we've imported data about the one-bedroom apartments and saved it to 3 variables: Brooklyn 1-bed, Manhattan 1-bed, and Queens 1-bed. And you can see how we did that in lines 7, 10, and 13. But in this project, we only care about the price of apartments. So we've saved the prices in these variables: Brooklyn price, Manhattan price, and Queens price. And you can see that in lines 8, 11, and 14. So if we want to see what these arrays look like, we can do that with a print statement. So let's just say print Brooklyn price. And then when we save our code, we'll see it printed out over here. So on the left, we have just all of our row numbers, and on the right, we have all of the prices. Okay, so we're done with task number 1. Let's move on to task number 2, finding the mean. As a reminder, the mean is another way of saying the average. So in this case, it would be all of the prices added together divided by the total number of prices. But in Python, you don't need to do all of that by hand. There's a function that will do it for us, and that's part of the NumPy package, which we've imported up here in line 2 as NP. So before we calculate the means, let's just comment out this print statement here so it doesn't print out all of the information every time we run our code. And step 2 is to find the mean of our Brooklyn apartments. We're going to save that to a variable called Brooklyn mean. So here we have Brooklyn mean equals, and to calculate the mean in Python, you do np.average and Brooklyn price. Let's save our code. And we can see up here that it's updated the first line to say the mean price in Brooklyn is about $3,300. Okay, so task number 2 is done, and let's move on to number 3. So just the same way we did it before, we're just going to do this for the Manhattan apartments. So Manhattan mean equals np.average Manhattan price. Let's save our code again. Okay, so now we can see that our second line up here is updated to say the mean price in Manhattan is about $4,000. So that is higher than the mean in Brooklyn. Done with task number 3, and let's move on to task number 4, which is finding our final mean, the mean for the Queens apartments. So Queens mean equals np.average Queens price. Save our code again. And now up here we have the mean price in Queens is about $2,300. So that's the lowest out of the 3. Okay, we're done with task number 4, and let's move on to task number 5, which is calculating the medians. So just a reminder, finding the median is if you order in this case, all of the prices from lowest to highest, the median is the value that lands exactly in the middle, or if you have an even number, it's the 2 in the middle, or you can take the average of those 2, and that's the median. So again, you don't have to do this by hand. There's a function from NumPy that will do it for you. So let's do task number 5, just calculating the mean, or the median for Brooklyn. So we have Brooklyn median equals np.median for Brooklyn prices. Let's run our code and make sure it works. Alright, so now we have up here the median price in Brooklyn is $3,000. So pretty close to the mean price, just a little bit lower. Done with task number 5, and task number 6 is doing the same thing for Manhattan. So we have Manhattan median equals np.median Manhattan price. Let's see what we get. Alright, so it says the median price in Manhattan is $3,800. So again, it's close to the mean price in Manhattan, but just a little bit lower. So task number 6 is complete, and we can do task 7, which is finding the median for our Queens apartments. So Queens median equals np.median Queens price. So let's save our code. And we have the median price in Queens is $2,200. So just like for Brooklyn and Manhattan, the median for Queens is close to the mean for Queens, but again, it's just a little bit lower. So we're done with task 7, and we can move on to task 8, finding the mode. So the mode is the value that occurs the most frequently in the dataset. So in this case, it would be the price that occurs the most often. And again, we don't need to calculate this by hand. There's a function in the stats package, which is part of SciPy, that will do it for us. So let's calculate the Brooklyn mode. Brooklyn mode equals stats.mode for Brooklyn price. And let's see what we get. Now up here it says the mode price in Brooklyn is $2,500, and it appears 26 times out of 1,013. Alright, number 8 is done, and let's move on to task number 9, calculating the mode for Manhattan. Manhattan mode equals stats.mode for Manhattan price. Let's run our code again. And we have the mode price in Manhattan is $3,500, and it appears 56 times out of 1,476. So task number 9 is done, and we'll move on to number 10, calculating our final mode. So here we have Queens mode equals stats.mode and Queens price. Let's run it. And we have the mode price in Queens is $1,750, and it appears 11 times out of 232. So now task number 10 is complete, and we can move on to task 11 and thinking about what our data actually tells us. So now that we've calculated the mean, median, and mode, we want to be able to make inferences from those values. So just looking at the values that we have, we can say something about what the most expensive borough is to live in and which one is the least expensive. So across all of the mean, medians, and modes, Manhattan is the most expensive, and Queens is the least expensive. And then also just looking at this hint here, we can also make inferences about where the values that the data is centered around. So looking at the means and medians across the 3 boroughs, so the mean in Brooklyn is about 3,300 and the median is about 3,000. So those are slightly different, but judging by the mean, we can say that the data in Brooklyn for the Brooklyn apartments is centered around 3,300. And then similarly, we can say Manhattan is centered around 3,900 and Queens is centered around 2,300. So moving on to task number 12, Let's talk about the assumptions that we made when we drew these inferences. So one big assumption that you make anytime that you draw inferences from a data set is, looking at this hint here, we assumed that the data from StreetEasy is a representative sample of housing prices. But given that StreetEasy is only used by a subset of property owners, that's not necessarily a fair assumption to make. And actually, a quick search of a different site, rentcafe.com, tells you that the averages are different, so they're more like around 2,700 for Brooklyn, 4,200 for Manhattan, and about 2,200 for Queens. So these values are different, and if Rent Cafe has more data or is a more representative sample, then these are the values that we should be going off of. So in this case, Brooklyn and Queens, the Rent Cafe values are lower. Brooklyn, it's much lower, and in Manhattan, it's higher. So it's an interesting finding, and we can think about why it might be that the costs from rentcafe.com are higher in Manhattan and lower in Brooklyn or Queens. So we don't have an answer to this question, but it's worth asking and it's worth thinking about. So done with task number 12, and let's go on to our final task, number 13. So finally, we want to think about what the histograms for each of the data sets will look like. And if you have time, just take a minute to make a rough sketch of each of the histograms and label the mean, median, and mode on each one. And you can also go down to the hint here to see the actual histograms. That's all I have for you today. Feel free to play around with the full data set and calculate some more means, medians, and modes. Thanks for watching, and happy coding!